Okay, we're looking at prep test 48. This is section 1, and question 7 asks us to just strengthen the argument. Okay, so we know we've got a conclusion, we know we've got premises, we just need to identify them and then move on to the answer choices. And as usual, the conclusion to this occurs in the very first sentence. Enthusiasm for calculators for learning is really not a good thing. And then we kind of move to this notion of the inside and outside argument. The inside argument, or teachers observe that students with calculators can kind of like not have to worry about the mundane parts about mechanically solving a calculation. They can kind of focus on the principles, focus more on the principles of solving the calculation. And the outside argument says, you know what, you can learn the principles better. So it's all about the principles in this thing. You can learn the principles better by painstaking application of those principles. In a nutshell, it means in that algebra class we all took, they make us do the calculations. We can't have a calculator there unless it's just some horrendous calculation. And then it kind of goes on to say, you know, and that's why we shouldn't encourage the use. Okay, so. We have to identify something that strengthens the argument, and we should think about things in baskets and remember that strengthening the argument can either be justifying the conclusion, it can be an assumption or a requirement that's in the argument, or it can just be some factor that indicates that the conclusion is correct. And therefore strengthening the conclusion, it actually falls across the entire spectrum. So let's kind of go from E to A and see if we can identify the correct answer choice. E, teachers' enthusiasm for new educational aids is often not proportional to the pedagogical effectiveness of those devices. Well, that kind of seems, to be the correct answer, or at least maybe to strengthen it. But the idea is that the teachers we never identified that the teachers were enthusiastic here. We just said enthusiasm for calcs for learning is bad. The students could have been the ones that were saying that. The teachers were just observing. So it's kind of mixing the words up if you chose this as the strengthening part of the argument. Again, we don't know that the teachers were enthusiastic. Had we known that the teachers were enthusiastic, this could work to strengthen, but we simply don't know, therefore it does not. Let's look at D. Habits that are acquired by laborious and sometimes tedious practice are not as valuable as those that are painlessly mastered. Well, if we think of habits like the principles, okay, we're not really talking about the method by which we acquire them in the sense of one method being more valuable than the other. As far as them being valuable, all we're really talking about in this is what's the best way that we can remember these principles. If we could remember these with ease, it's just as good as if it might even be better in this argument if we could remember them easy. But we're not saying like the only way to learn is learning the hard way. That's not what it's really talking about. So we're just saying kind of learning the hard way is really the best way to learn this because we don't think you remember it as well when you learn it the easy way. And D is not getting that. D is saying, hey, regardless of how you learn it, we wanted to make it hard. Whichever, even if harder's, even if learning it easy is just as effective, we don't care. We want to make it hard on you. So D doesn't work to strengthen this at all because that's not what the argument is getting at. C, it is much more important that students retain the knowledge of general principles than that this knowledge be easily acquired. So let's kind of think about that for a minute. We are talking about principles in this argument, and that's kind of the reason why we're saying, the enthusiasm for calcs ain't good, and the reason why is because you don't seem to remember the principles as well. And we don't want you to use a calculator because you learn the principles better without the calculator. Now, if we think about that, let's kind of go back to this answer choice. It's much more important that we retain the knowledge of general principles than that knowledge be easily acquired. That's exactly right. I mean, and this is going even a little further. The calculators might have the general principles in them, and we might even be able to acquire them by punching numbers into the calculator, but that is not what we're getting at. What's more important in this is that we learn the principles. That's why we don't want to use this item that already really has the principles inside it. So C actually works to strengthen the argument. Let's go to B and A though. Slide rules, which are less technologically sophisticated, analogous. Let me restate that. Slide rules, which are less technologically sophisticated analogs of calculators, were widely used in the learning of mathematics several decades ago. Okay, there's a couple of things that is happening here. I mean, one, it's saying that kind of the issue has always been here. And two, it almost works to weaken it. It's saying, look, we used these items a long time ago that are kind of like calculators, and we sure did know our math back then. Either way, it doesn't work to encourage the use of hard work rather than calculators. Okay, so B doesn't do anything, or it could even slightly work to weaken it. And then A, some students who know how to use calculators also thoroughly understand the mathematical principles that calculators obey. Well, because it says some, it doesn't really work to weaken the argument, but let's just say it's had a little bit more oomph to it and said most. That would actually work to weaken it, because it would suggest that using the calculator doesn't prevent you from knowing these principles. But because it just says some, it doesn't even really weaken it, it doesn't strengthen it, it's kind of irrelevant. Therefore, C is the correct answer to the question.